My dear friends, I come to you once again with a summary of Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday lessons of lesson 11. Wednesday talks about the investigative judgment. Thursday talks about typology as prophecy. But before we go on, please, if you have not yet subscribed, consider subscribing to my channel. I really need your support. Okay, when we come to Wednesday lesson, we're given Daniel 7 and Daniel 8, and the lesson gave us a chart of the kingdoms: Babylon, Media Persia, Greece, pagan Rome, Papal Rome. That's the little horn in Daniel 7. And Daniel 8 starts with Media Persia, Greece, pagan Rome, Papal Rome. We know that Daniel 8, the dream was given to Daniel at the time Media Persia had taken over from Babylon. So Babylon is not captured in Daniel 8 because at that time Babylon was no more. Now, when we talk of investigative judgment, when we read Daniel 7, we see a judgment, a picture has been given to us of a judgment scene going there where the Most High is being seated and judgment is being taking place and all that. Most of the times, some people interpret this to be the final time of the world where judgment will be taking place. But the lesson was pointing to us that this judgment scene we see in Daniel 7 is the investigative judgment, which took place after 1798 when the Pope was captured and imprisoned by Napoleon's general. So this investigative judgment started after 1798. The lesson was also pointing to the fact that the cleansing of the sanctuary and the investigative judgments, the judgment scene in Daniel 7, they are all the same thing. Just like the chart that was given to us. Daniel 7 talks about Media Persia. Daniel 8 talks about Media Persia but uses ram, while in Daniel 7 uses bear. When you come to Greece, Daniel 7 uses leopard, but in Daniel 8 uses he-goat. When you come to Daniel 7, pagan Rome, that's the fourth beast. But in Daniel 8, uses horn moves horizontally. Papa Rome in Daniel 7 is the little horn. But Papa Rome in Daniel 8 is what? The horn moves vertically. And so it's the same thing, just that the symbols are what? Are different. So this one too is telling the sanctuaries, the cleansing of the sanctuary and the investigative judgment, or the judgment seen in the Daniel 7, they all points to the investigative judgment. So let me pick my words well again. The investigative scene, the judgment scene that is seen in Daniel 7 and the cleansing of the sanctuary seen in Daniel 8, they all points to what? The investigative judgment. The lesson was also pointing to the fact that the 2,300 days prophecy, when we use the year-day principle, which is 2,300 years, and the 70 weeks prophecy, that is 490 years, they are all the same thing. So it's not like the prophecy, that the 70 weeks prophecy, stands alone where it will start and end before a full prophecy of 2,300 years will also start. It's the same thing. The 490 years or the 70 weeks is a cutoff from the 2,300 days. And when we make the calculations, it points to 1844. So it says that counting forward 2,300 years, we come to 1844, which is not long after 1798 and before the second coming of Jesus. This is when Jesus entered into the most holy and began his work of intercession of cleansing the heavenly sanctuary. Okay, that is a summary for the Wednesday lesson. I would love to hear your view or your comments on that. Thursday, typology as prophecy. When we talk of typology, we are looking at things that were happening in history, but its actual reality, but it's actually pointing to something in future. It's greater reality in future. Events, or certain things that happened in history or were happening in history, but were actually pointing to its greater reality in future. And so when the lesson gave us 1 Corinthians 10:1-13, where Paul was advising the Corinth using the story of Moses and the Israelites on the desert when they crossed the Red Sea and they still didn't give God glory, they still didn't obey, and some died, was using that to advise them, or advising all of us to not to be like them, but to know that these things were writing for our learning, so that we not end up like them. Paul made mention of the rock that fed the Israelites water, that gave them water. That rock stands for who? Jesus Christ. And so in the Old Testament, we see the rock, the reality, rock gave Israel water, but its actual reality or greater reality is who? Jesus Christ. Now, when the lesson gave us some key texts or memory verses that we should consider its type and antitype. And so when we go to Matthew 12:40, Jesus talks about Jonah spending 3 days in the belly of the fish, the same way the Son of Man will spend 3 days in the belly of the earth. Now, Jesus Christ was telling us that what happened in the Old Testament concerning Jonah was pointing to his death in the grave for 3 days. And so Jonah, yes, actually happened in the Old Testament, where he spent 3 days in the belly of the fish. But actually it's pointing to Jesus Christ being in the grave for 3 days. John 19:36, Jesus, the quotation there, not one of his bones shall be broken. And we know that in the Israelites, during the Passover, they were instructed that when they are eating the meat, they should make sure that the bone will not be what? They will not break the bone. That instruction and that practice was pointing to Jesus Christ's death, whose bone will never be broken. And so we could see that on the cross, the two thieves, their bones were broken, but Jesus Christ's bone was not broken, because when they got there, he had already died. John 3:14-15. Jesus said, as Moses lifted the serpent, same way the Son of Man or Jesus Christ will be lifted. And so Moses on the desert, when the Israelites were being bitten by snake, lifted the serpent, so that while they look at the serpent, the lifted serpent, they will be healed from the snake bite. That serpent was pointing to Jesus Christ in the New Testament. It's actually pointing to. So Jesus Christ is the actual or the greater reality. Let me use that word, the greater reality. Then Romans 5:14 talks about Adam and Jesus Christ. Adam is the first Adam. Jesus Christ is the second Adam. That's the first Adam sinned, pointing to the second Adam, Jesus Christ, who never sinned but gave his life for all of us. Okay, John 1:29 talks about the Lamb of God who takes away sin. Now, when we go to Bible, from the beginning when man sinned, God used a lamb as a sacrifice. And that lamb, and the lamb that the Israelites were sacrificing all those years to atone for their sins, that lamb was actually pointing to the greater reality in future, who is Jesus Christ. So Jesus Christ is that lamb. So that is the lesson for us in Thursday. A lot of things that happened in the Old Testament that were pointing to Jesus Christ, who is the greater reality. That is why as Christians, now we have Jesus Christ, we do not practice those things again. The fourth note here says that in each case, Jesus and the New Testament writers applied the type and antitype interpretation that allow the prophetic significance to stand out. In this way, they point to a greater fulfillment of the historical reality. And so Jesus Christ used these things to interpret scripture, to let the Israelites or whoever was around at that time to know that these things you were practicing were actually pointing to this, and may come in fulfill all these things. Okay, when we go to Friday, the Friday gave us some chart also there from Daniel 7 and Daniel 8, just as what is in Wednesday lesson. But the last thing here on the Friday is the judgment in heaven. That is Daniel 7 talks about judgment seen in heaven. But when you come to Daniel 8, it talks about the cleansing of heavenly sanctuary. Like I said, These two things are the same, and they are all pointing to the investigative judgment. Let me read something here from Friday. It said the crucial point to see here is that the judgment scene in Daniel 7, which occurs after 1260 years of persecution, is the same thing as the cleansing of the sanctuary in Daniel 8:14. And this judgment scene in heaven is what leads ultimately to the establishment of God's eternal kingdom at the end of this fallen earth's sad history. Hence, we have powerful biblical evidence for the great importance that scripture places on Daniel 8:14 and the event it signifies. Thank you so much, my dear, for watching. Thank you for sharing the video, and please don't forget to like. If you have not yet subscribed, I want to beg you, please consider subscribing. Thank you, and God bless you.